Well, it's time for a special video on how to spot disinformation. And I want to make it clear this kind of includes misinformation, but mainly disinformation. And of course, disinformation it's an important thing to know how to spot because it can swing elections, it can start wars, all kinds of bad things can happen when disinformation is received as fact and acted upon as though it is factual information. So today I'm going to break down, I've got a list, I actually came prepared, and I have a list of 10 techniques or 10 things to look for to help you spot disinformation in the news and the mass media around you. And hopefully this will be very helpful as those of you that are navigating the world, trying to figure out what can be trusted and what not. So I've done some videos before that was somewhat tongue-in-cheek about this, but in all seriousness, this is a real straight-up guide. I have my little 10 points I'm going to read off about spotting disinformation. And I think we'll all be better for it if we learn these, how to spot these things. Now, a quick word about how I came to make this video. In the Creator Studio on YouTube, there's a little tab that you can click on that says Inspiration. And it has a little AI deal that helps you come up with videos based on your channel's content. And YouTube, thank you YouTube AI, you inspired me to make this video. So one of the suggested topics for my channel was how to spot disinformation. And I thought, why not do it? So, so this is straight out of YouTube. So I can't go wrong. I'm literally doing what the AI bots told me to do. So I've compiled a list of how to spot disinformation. And again, I think this is really important because I totally agree with the YouTubes and the Facebooks that disinformation can be highly destructive. And nowhere have we seen that play out in past events. Like there are actually people now that still don't realize that the Gulf of Tonkin was not what it was purported to be. So disinformation like the Gulf of Tonkin incident that kicked off the Vietnam War, things like that radically shift our culture. Of course, everybody's aware of like the incubator baby story that started the Iraq War. Classic disinformation where Hill and Knowlton, a major public relations company, was employed by the US government to peddle disinformation to the government through a third party so they could have plausible deniability. So anyway, let's jump right in, and in usual interesting books reviewed form, I'm going to give some anecdotes to accompany some of these points. But one of the first things I think is real important to look for when you're looking out for disinformation is disinformation will make an appeal to experts or institutions, that those are the real authorities. Institutional authorities, expert authority, guys with the funny hats or whatever, those are the people that you look to. Specific personalities are to be trusted and followed without question. Your own perspective is discouraged, and you are to adopt the party perspective, and you are encouraged to argue and protect the status quo. And the fascinating thing about that, what made me think of that is, you know, when disinformation like, again, like let's say the Gulf of Tonkin incident or when the first Gulf War was kicked off, you're not encouraged to have your own position. You're adopting the official position, and that's easy to argue because you got the majority on your side. So you're not really defending your own personal position. You're defending something bigger than yourself. So you're not really defending a personal thing you've arrived at. You're just hopping on the wagon with everybody else and defending that. And that's a lot easier than critically analyzing things and coming to a conclusion and then defending your own conclusion that you have thought out. Now, moving right along, catchphrases, and catchphrases that typically use rhyming words and alliteration to really get you on board with a specific idea or concept or a way to react to certain things. And when the Iraq War, the second Iraq War started, that's where I really first saw that. I was old enough. I think I was it was right before my 30th birthday when the second Iraq war started. And one of the common things when I would express any doubts about what was going on, the WMD disinformation that was put out, when I was doubting any of that, and this is the crazy thing now, it's like this was all readily available information, but the disinformation was unified across the entire mass media to a point that it shouted out any voices to the contrary. And a good example of that was the simple fact of one of the things when weapons inspectors were going into Iraq looking for chemical weapons and biological weapons, they were saying there's no record that Saddam Hussein ever got rid of weapons X, Y, and Z. And with just a little bit of legwork, you could figure out that a lot of these biological weapons, in fact, I'm pretty sure most all of them, have an expiration date. And it's a lot like, it's akin to buying milk. So if you buy milk in your house, and I see you buy milk and take it into your house, and I never see you throw that milk away, then yes, let's say, and I never saw you drink it or anything like that, yes, you might still have the milk in your refrigerator, but after 15 years, I guarantee you that milk is not really milk anymore. It's something, but it ain't milk, and it's not anything you would want to drink. And there was a lot of that kind of situation with the WMDs. There were a lot of encouraging you not to think about those details and not listen to some of the inspectors and listen to the right people. And one of the catchphrases that was used a lot was, do you hate freedom? Or do you want the troops to die? Or that was typically after the war had started. But there were all these things like, love protects. Like you're a young man with a family starting out. You got a young daughter there, and love protects. You want to protect your family, right? And that was one of the things that was used to really project that disinformation about the WMDs out there. It's like you want to protect your family, right? So this is something that has to be done to protect your family. Now, some of the other phrases that I thought of when I was putting this together was the follow the science is a popular one. And there's the antique clock. And of course, satanic panic is a classic one that is still rolled out anytime someone brings up anything related to occult criminal activity. That's dismissed with, well, that was part of the satanic panic. So don't look any further into it. And then, of course, we got Putin puppet, and you're not going to do your own research, are you? They're doing their own research. So when has there ever been a time when it was bad to investigate something? Now, which brings us to point number 3. So point number 3, research is discouraged. Disinformation discourages research, and it reverses skepticism and makes you feel skeptical when you go after the person that's not getting in line. So skepticism is typically something done by an outsider looking at an institutional authority. So if everybody believes, if the Roman Catholic Church is saying the world is flat, and somebody's like, gee, I kind of think it might be round, that would be an example of a skeptic. The skeptic would be the person challenging the official view. So if you are adopting the official view and you are attacking the actual skeptic, you're not a skeptic, you're a partisan. So real important to understand that difference. And I brought that up on this channel before. I think there's a deliberate effort when disinformation comes into play to blur those lines and make people feel skeptical when in fact they are behaving as partisans. But research is discouraged. Skepticism is reversed to criticize the nonconformist, and real problems require more information, not less information. And I would love to hear someone explain to me a situation where less information is beneficial and more information is bad. And I know I'm going to hear all kinds of things like, well, but bad information equals, will lead you this way or this. My point is, if you're telling people you should not research something, you should not investigate something, that should be a giant red flag. Because again, more information is always going to be better. And a good example of that is when the pandemic was going on, one of the crazy things that I saw was discouraging anyone from looking into any treatment other than the official canon, which was crazy because if this really is a whole new illness popping on the scene and this is a new virus that we got to watch out for, then you would encourage doctors to think creatively and think outside the box to solve this problem. And you would put the call out to everybody who is willing and say, hey, we got to figure this out. And if you got something that works, let's do it. But instead, we saw just the opposite. We saw doctors punished and clinics shut down for not doing things that were actually turned out to be hurtful to the patients. And a lot of alternative treatments were, in some cases, discouraged. People had their licenses threatened, some taken away. But again, you wouldn't do that if you genuinely are looking for a cure for a virus. You want all hands on deck. You want everybody addressing this. And there is no party line because everybody's trying to fix it, allegedly. Now, 4, censorship of opposition and deplatforming, banning news outlets, and of course demonetizing content as we've seen on the YouTubes that we're on right now. Anytime we have somebody telling other people, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the research aspect, when you hear people saying, no, you can't listen to this voice, you aren't allowed to listen to person X right now, that should again have giant red flags by it, because that basically you're saying you're too stupid to figure out for yourself what's going on. Trust the experts, they're going to lead you through this. And trust the experts that we tell you. You can't go off on your own here. But that censorship of opposing voices or any kind of opposition, that is a huge red flag that you're dealing with disinformation. Now, 5, and this is one that I think is really important. If you get nothing else out of this video, please take this along with you, is exceptional circumstances. That this is one that I see employed a lot for disinformation, and I'll give you some examples. It's exceptional situations requiring exceptional solutions. And of course, for example, if you're my age and you remember the Iraq War, the torture program, and the whole preemptive war with Iraq is a great example of that. This whole idea of preemptive warfare was seen as this horribly barbaric thing to do. And in fact, I watched a lot of my friends and family gradually shift over from thinking in the summer of 2002, thinking that was insane for us to have a preemptive war when no one had attacked us, to by March of 2003 saying, oh yeah, we have to do this. Again, love protects. You want to protect your family, right? But exceptional circumstances. This is a new, different situation where there could be these WMDs employed by radio-controlled planes and some of these crazy Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner kind of plots that could kill you and your family. So you have to do all these special things. Because of these unique, special, exceptional circumstances, you're going to have to do exceptional things to counter that. And another byproduct of that was, of course, the torture program, and which was introduced as waterboarding and that sort of thing. But the torture program and, of course, censorship, where you say, well, you know, we have to have the censorship because this exceptional circumstance dictates that we have to shut people down for their safety. So, again, more information is always better than less. So, but of course that brought on special war powers, state of emergency, and then of course deficit spending. And if you're my age, you might remember where George Bush said he got to the trifecta on because he had that he was able to introduce this massive deficit spending because of the attack of 9/11 and the Iraq War. There are several things, but he called it the trifecta that he had hit, which most of us that were paying attention found that highly troubling to refer to these major, massive human tragedies as the trifecta. So, moving right along, number 6. Oh, and I should say, before I move along from 5, the exceptional circumstances. This, I think, this is why this is so important. I've couldn't tell you the number of times I've had people use this kind of situation and television is a medium of exceptions, where you're told the exception is going to be the rule. So your personal experience is discounted. You don't really know your personal experience. You're actually the exception. And what you see on television, that's actually the rule. And a good example of this was a few years ago. I say a few years ago, this is probably like 10 or 15 years ago. There was a big push to change the laws about assisted suicide, that we should have special laws that made it so if someone assisted in a suicide of somebody that was terminally ill, that would be okay. And I had a lot of friends and family make these compelling cases, like, yeah, I saw this deal on TV the other night, and this person, they were going to help this person out, and then they're risking all this jail time for just helping out a friend or a loved one. And my response to that, and I think the rational response should be, that's why we have a jury trial system. We don't need a new law for that. We don't need a law for this one exceptional circumstance. We already have a jury trial. And if you are willing to snuff out a human life and you believe it's for a good cause, and you should have no problem standing in front of a jury of your peers making that case. But when you start rewriting the laws to take out the elderly or the sick, the people that are unhealthy in your population, that is a door to eugenics that you do not want to even crack that door open. And I found it very troubling, the number of people who hopped on that bandwagon because, hey, here's this exceptional circumstance. It's like, we already have allowances for that in our legal system. We don't need to create a law that's going to make it easier to kill people. That is a very bad idea. And one more example on that exceptional circumstance part is in a Bible class I was in back during when the whole Syria thing started up. We had one of the elders of the church I was going to at the time was trying to get everybody riled up about Syria, that this is why the United States really need to get involved in Syria. And he was encouraging people to pull out their iPhones and pull up some of the atrocities that were happening over there. And this is right before all the stuff came out about ISIS and more stuff started coming out that it was not exactly what it was purported to be. But this particular elder in the church was making this compelling case for why the United States really needed to get in there and clean house and take care of things, and why we needed to support that. And me being me and not being able to shut my mouth, I said, from a Christian perspective, any of you that are familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, I said, anytime somebody says we should ignore the Beatitudes or the Sermon on the Mount, to love your enemies and, take care of the people that are hurting around you. But more importantly, if you just read the Beatitudes, read the Sermon on the Mount, you'll see what I'm saying is the Sermon on the Mount is all about empathy and all about compassion towards people that are not your people, and I know I'm being very broad there, but taking care of people and loving your enemies and not taking action against your enemies just because you can, whatever. Anyway, my point was that anytime someone says in a Christian setting that we should suspend the Beatitudes, we should suspend the Sermon on the Mount, because this situation is so bad, so dire, that this transcends even the love of Christ. This is so bad, we're going to have to suspend our Christian love for a little bit. I said, anytime that happens, that is the devil talking. Because when somebody goes, hey, all that kumbaya, love each other stuff, that's great. But right now, we don't have time for that. We need to kick butt and take names. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take all that love one another stuff and love your enemies. I'm going to put that in a little box. We're going to put that in a shelf. And once we're done with kicking butt in Syria and doing what we got to do, we'll get that right back out and we'll go right back to it. But right now, we don't have time for that silly, love each other kind of crap. And I said that was, when you hear that is the devil talking. And that didn't go over very well, but whatever, I stand by it. Now, Number 6 on my list. Definitions are no longer allowed to be objective. The experts, institution, or government define all the things. Anti-Semitism, torture, vaccines, enemy non-combatants. That's one of the things that happened with the Second Gulf War was the enemy, the non-combatants, was a whole legal fiction that was introduced so that certain Geneva Convention protections didn't have to be extended to wide swaths of people on the battlefield. And the other thing, of course, as many of you were paying attention for the last 5 years, if you have to change the definition of a vaccine, something's not right. Major alarm bells should go off if you're having to literally change the definition for something like a vaccine in order for your new thing to be considered what was historically called a vaccine. But yes, anytime those definitions get squirrely, anti-Semitism, that's one of my favorites because it's I forget which rabbi it was that said, the hate that mutates. So it's whatever we're told it is. So there's not an objective definition of anti-Semitism. It's just, I'll know it when I see it. And that leads to basically everybody, myself included, getting tarred with that brush if you're critical of policies in Israel or critical of AIPAC or anything else. That leaves you open to being called an anti-Semite. So good fun for everybody. Now, moving right along, 7, fear and a constant sense of urgency is typically accompanies disinformation. Fear and a constant sense of urgency is encouraged. Fear becomes a virtue. And of course, all the stuff that was going on with COVID, that really shocked me. At the time, I had my own shop, and I was amazed at the people that a lot of friends and family and business colleagues, it was like to be afraid became like a badge of honor, that you knew to be afraid of this thing. And if you weren't afraid of it, then you were ignorant and backwards and, what do you want to kill your grandparents? And of course, in that same vein, the WMD scare. As some of you, again, if you're my age or older, you remember the whole WMD scare. There was all these threat levels of this constant bombardment of terror scares of, hey, there's, maybe some Iraqis might have snuck in the country with a biological weapon, so, watch out. In fact, at one point, funny story about that, funny and tragic story, at one point, I think Homeland Security came out with an announcement because there was supposedly a high-level threat of somebody might release a biological weapon in the United States. So they encouraged people to go out and buy drop cloths and duct tape to seal up the inside of their house. Well, I think a family actually died of suffocation because they did exactly that. They followed the rules to a T and suffocated in their own house because they sealed themselves in. And that was one of the first things I thought of with all of the mask mandates when they started doing like people wearing 2 masks at one time and all that, where some of the stuff was downright ridiculous if you were in a clear state of mind. But through the constant fear, the disinformation sticks. Now, this number 8 kind of fits with some of the others I've talked about before, but I've talked about this in the member section, but empathy is discouraged. And you see that a lot in any kind of tyrannical government really likes to discourage empathy, because empathy is not necessarily that I run out and buy you food or clothing or whatever. Empathy is also me understanding your viewpoint, that we radically disagree on something, but I look to understand your viewpoint so that I can see where you're coming from. And that is to me, just the most basic of human qualities, that you understand where someone is coming from, even someone you disagree with militantly, you at least try to see their viewpoint and why they feel that way. That doesn't mean you adopt that viewpoint, but at least you try to understand why that person feels the way they do, and that helps you cooperate and move forward, and that's what drives good diplomacy. And when empathy is discouraged, then we typically have an enemy is created and labeled as such, And any effort to understand an opposing viewpoint is discouraged, and that's considered a weakness. And one of the things that I would hear a lot of, and I still hear this a lot when I talk about what's happening in Ukraine or whatever, and I articulate a point that is factually sound, and everything I'm saying can be backed up with facts that are easily verifiable, typically the response I will get is, that sounds like something Putin would say. Well, that's not is it true or not? It doesn't matter who would say it. I mean, I bet Putin loves clean water and sunshine, but that doesn't make those things not exist or bad because he likes them. That's not, but also with when Trump mentioned ivermectin and some of the alternative treatments for COVID, that was all, oh, that's crazy talk. That's like something Trump would say. And interesting story here, and I'll try not to get too sidetracked, but I think this is real important for those of you that were paying attention through the whole pandemic thing, was right before, as we were going into that in early March of 2020, I had a customer out on the West Coast that was a retired doctor, an MD, and nice guy. He was leaned pretty far left in his politics, and I say that's important to the story, but leaned pretty far left. In fact, a lot of he was buying materials for me to do anti-Trump artwork, and we would talk about various things when he would call in and place his orders. And one day he called in, and it was right when COVID had become a thing, and he said, "Hey, I got the inside scoop on this COVID thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure you do, whatever." But I'm like, I'll hear him out. And he said, "No, seriously, if you go right now," and this was before the lockdowns and all that, he said, "Go right now, go to your family doctor and tell him you're going on a trip to Africa." And he said they will automatically prescribe hydroxychloroquine for malaria or river blindness or whatever. He said, "Get on that right now and get your family on it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, I was trying to be polite because at this point I was like, is this another SARS thing? Is this another swine flu silliness or whatever?" And he was very adamant about this. And I said, "Well, my father-in-law used to run a pharmacy, so I'll ask my in-laws about it and see." And he got all excited and said, "Well," he said, "if you can score any extra hydroxychloroquine, please let me know because they are out of it on the West Coast." He said, "All the politicians are on it." And I was like, huh. So I wrote it down on a Post-it note and I said, "Have a great day." And he went his way. And I have not talked to him since. And I'm curious what he would say about that now, because not longer after that, that's when it all hell broke loose. And then not longer after that was when Trump said something about hydroxychloroquine. And then I remembered, and I got out that Post-it note and was like, holy crap, that's what that dude was talking about. Which hydroxychloroquine has a similar function as ivermectin. So anyway, and those of you, back to the censorship thing, that was one of those things that, in fact, I don't know if this video will get in trouble for me even saying those things, but even talking about those things in a video could get you demonetized, even saying those names of those medications, which now have wound up actually being very effective. But at the time, we weren't supposed to explore those options. Truth and facts. Now, this is number 9, so we're up to 9 now. Truth and facts are determined by consensus rather than critical thought. And that's something I still see a lot of, but especially a lot of the disinformation where you say, well, we have 50 experts that say X, Y, and Z is false. Well, you don't vote on the truth. Everybody can be wrong and just not know it. So there is no, I'm speaking my truth, he's speaking his truth. There is truth. There is what is objectively factual information. And then there is everything else is things that are false. But you can't vote on what is true and what is factual. And anytime you see an appeal to that of the majority, hey, all these people believe this thing, so therefore it must be so. That is a huge red flag that you're dealing with disinformation. And I saw a funny cartoon a few weeks ago, and I've tried to find it for this video, but unfortunately I couldn't find it. But it's a guy looking at a computer screen, and he says, hey, honey, come in here. This guy on the internet found out something that all the doctors and scientists haven't found yet. And of course, it's a funny joke because we're making fun of the people looking at alternate theories and about COVID treatments and that sort of thing. Well, the hilarious thing about that is you could easily change the wording of that cartoon to be like, hey, honey, come in here. These crazy abolitionists think that slavery is bad and they're trying to stop it. When everybody knows slavery is great and that's how we have a competitive economy. So it's like you can easily say that like just about every mass movement that has happened for good has happened with the minority initiating that. And that's just how those things happen, is a minority of people realize something is bad or wrong or incorrect and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be spraying that on our crops. Maybe we shouldn't be drinking that. Maybe DDT shouldn't be sprayed up and down the streets at night. But that starts with a minority, not a majority. But again, you can't vote on the facts. So now 10, now this is going to be one, I might have some people arguing with me over this, but I have Lynn Crook's book that reminded me of this. And this is the final one, is a call to non-action. So do nothing. And I know some of you are going to say, no, but the disinformation has you do a lot of things. But what disinformation does is you do only what you're told. You're not encouraged to implement any kind of independent action. You're to go with the flow. Go with the flow, shut off your personal autonomy, and all that could be dangerous. So I saw someone posted a meme the other day on the Facebooks where they were saying that we need to normalize saying, I don't know enough to understand this. And I forget how the whole thing was worded, but it was basically shut up and do what you're told in a more polite way. Trust the experts. And but that kind of non-action or no independent action, I guess if I was to qualify that, no independent action, you're to go with the flow. Just move with the rest of the herd and everything's fine. If you dig in your heels, there's going to be problems. And it reminded me of Lynn Crook's book, False Memories, The Deception That Silenced Millions by Lynn Crook. Excellent book about her personal experience with abuse in her family and taking her parents to court over that. And she made a great point in that book. And I say this over in the book review I've done on that. I'll see if I can find that and link it on the end screen. That perpetrators, and she's mainly talking about perpetrators of abuse, but this goes for a lot of other bad things happening. But perpetrators typically aren't asking you to do anything. And that's one of the reasons it's so easy for people to side with a perpetrator rather than a victim, because the perpetrator is telling you not to do anything. You're just to go along. You go with the herd and everything's fine. Whereas the victim is saying, I want you to join me and take action against this perpetrator. And I think that's a real important point to think about when a lot of these political movements and all as well, where you're not encouraged to have any kind of independent thought. You're encouraged to just follow the crowd and go along with everything. And that's how perpetrators remain unnoticed. Because again, who wants to do something, stick their neck out in a way that could potentially cause them financial, emotional, or physical harm? Nobody. So, hey, what's easier than just going along with everything? And if you see the people that aren't going along with it, you see those people being punished, then that's a pretty good reason to stay in your lane, so to speak, and stay with the crowd or with the herd as you potentially march right off a cliff. So, and in closing, I'm going to try to wrap this up now, but in closing, I think it's real important when we're looking at the information that the reason I came up with these 10 things is it's not as simple as certain things are true, certain things are false, depending on who's saying it. There's times when all different news outlets have been right about different things. Again, it's like just because somebody like, insert enemy du jour, let's say Manuel Noriega or whoever likes clean water, that doesn't suddenly make clean water bad. That just means that maybe somebody we don't like likes clean water as well. So those, again, anytime we see that kind of effort to blur those lines and say, well, that sounds like something so-and-so would say, and we know he's bad, so you got to stop that. Anytime we see that, we got problems. And in my personal research of all these crazy topics on this channel, one of the things I've come to realize about what is typically called by the mainstream news, conspiracy theories, is conspiracy theories, all they really are at their core are cracks in the information monopoly. Is mainstream television news and internet news and print and radio, those all work together ever since the Telecom Act of, 1996. Those work together in ways that I think a lot of people would be shocked at how well coordinated that is. And what a conspiracy theory is a crack in that's allowing actual information to get through. So that's one of the reasons why we're constantly encouraged not to trust our own eyes and ears. So if we know someone in a specific area and they have a firsthand account that differs from the official narrative, we're told to discount that. That's an anomaly. Don't pay attention to that. That's just a weird one-off situation. What we're telling you is the actual situation. And I also have, just so you guys could see, one of the things that I did back right after 9/11, when I started realizing there was a lot of crazy stuff about 9/11, I started compiling this, which is all these news stories that I would print out that were all from, a lot of these were news stories. A lot of these were news stories that in mainstream publications like the BBC and the CNN, all kinds of print articles before they got disappeared. And I have a couple of different binders full of those kinds of stories because it's fascinating to go back now and read some of those and see how many of those stories were lost to time. And a few of you in the comment section have brought up some stuff that I had forgotten about, like that, certain events that were a big deal for a couple of days and then they got disappeared. But one thing I've brought up to some of my friends that accuse me of, being a crazy, wacky conspiracy theorist is, what I tell them is, if I had said in 1990, if I had said in August of 1990 that, hey, that story about incubator babies, the Iraqis pulling babies out of incubators and throwing them on the floor to die, that's fake. That is a deliberate fake story to start a war. I would have been called a crazy conspiracy theory. Now, I have to admit, at the time, I was 17 years old, and I thought everything was exactly as advertised. But if I had said that, I would have been considered a conspiracy theorist at the time, to say, hey, Hill and Knowlton just got this girl, trained her, and gave her acting lessons to the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter on how to do this and stand in front of a fake human rights committee. And if I had said all that, that would have been considered wacky conspiracy stuff. Now, we know now that that's all exactly what happened, that Hill and Knowlton really did that whole push to get the United States into that war, or convince the public. The government was already on board, but to get the U.S. population on board, that was the story, the galvanizing story that made that happen. Now, some 35 years later, most people are kind of like, oh, shucks, yeah, how would we have known? That's crazy. But the people who did know got shouted down. So at some point, and this is what I tell my friends that critique the things on this channel, is at some point we need to be bigger than the stories of the day. We need to think bigger than that and realize and see this stuff in real time and not just shout down the people saying, hey, that's a problem. Why are they trying to get us to go do this? Why are they trying to get us to go fight these wars? And again, that is where the disinformation is literally deadly, is using things like the Gulf of Tonkin story or the WMD story. Look it up and you'll see there's a the famous picture of Colin Powell holding the little vial of anthrax when he testified before Congress. And all of that turned out to be complete bovine excrement. And many of us at that time knew it was that, and we got shouted down for pointing it out. And then, of course, 20 some years later, we're told, shucks, wish we could have known that. And that's the whole point of this channel, is that we need to start recognizing that in real time, because that's the unfortunate thing. The disinformation people, they love it when it takes you 20 years. They'll let you do that. They'll let you 20 years later, we can all laugh and joke about WMDs and be like, shucks, yeah, how could that have happened? Bad intelligence. But at the time when it could actually make a difference, when we could tell our sons and daughters or ourselves and be like, dig in our heels and say, no, I'm not going to go fight in a war over a lie, that's when it matters. And that's when we have to do something. So to be able to realize this stuff in real time, we have to pay attention and we have to be able to spot the disinformation. And I think the most valuable thing we can do, because I know many of you have pointed out a few times that a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this channel is fairly grim, but the most powerful thing in our arsenal is the ability to dig in our heels and say no. Now, we might pay a price for that. We might have friends and relatives turn against us, and I can tell you firsthand exactly what that's like. But at the same time, not having Iraqi blood on my hands is kind of a good thing. And there's a lot of other similar things. I don't want to just harp on that. But there's plenty of times where we can say no to something, and if enough of us do it, it can't happen. If the evangelical church had refused to go to war, refused to allow their sons and daughters to go to Iraq, that war would not have been possible. So the more people that are aware, the more people that are paying attention, the less of that kind of stuff that can take root. So anyway, hope you enjoyed my 10 tips for spotting disinformation. I know that was kind of a rambling list, and I'm sure I'm going to hear about it in the comment section. But anyway, thanks for watching, and to the members, really appreciate your support of the channel.